Thank you very much, Tommy, and thank you very much to all of you. I should thank Anne for using the phrase when I joined the plenary that I was among you. I think that's the first time that anyone's ever said that about me, and it made me feel really important. I, as Tommy said, worked for 20 years in the back room of politics, and I spent a lot of that time writing speeches for politicians, and usually about subjects about which I knew very little, and very often at a week's notice or sometimes at a day's notice. And the first resolution I made when I left that job was that I would never again accept an invitation to talk to people who knew more than I did about subjects that are their areas of concern and passion and expertise, which is why about 3 months ago I spoke to the College of Psychiatrists about mental health. I don't seem to be able to learn, and here I am doing it again. You've already had a very long day. You've shared expertise, and you've shared passion, and you've shared a lot of experience in the course of the day. And I think it would be entirely inappropriate of me to try and pretend that I have something to add to your expertise. But I've been very taken, I have to say, by some of the language that I've heard in the last 3/4 of an hour or so. And one of the conclusions I came to listening to it was that it says a great deal for the integrity of an organisation like Pobble that they would facilitate a conference and allow people to share words like fear and despair. Clearly, those emotions are here in part because of the passion you feel for the subject. And clearly they're here also because of the way in which lifelong learning has developed in Ireland, or not developed in Ireland, and because of the way things are happening right now in the whole field of lifelong learning. I thought that probably what I should try to do is to share one or two experiences with you, and they are, I suppose, the experiences of a frequently confused, sometimes reluctant lifelong learner. I joined Bernardo's, as Tommy said, 5 years ago. In fact, I joined it on my 55th birthday. So it was a great relief to be told that there's still learning possible for older men. And one of the first discoveries I made when I joined Bernardo's was that I had just placed myself at the bottom of a very steep learning curve. That happened in two ways and for two reasons. First of all, it happened because I had never been a CEO before, and I was now the CEO of an organisation of about 350 people, 349 of whom knew more about the work than I did. And I was surrounded by a management team that was incredibly professional, incredibly expert in what it did, very passionate and committed to its work, and every single one of them has a master's degree. And as somebody who has probably one of the worst BComs that UCC ever handed out, it took me an awful long time to admit to my lack of academic qualification when I joined Bernardo's. Secondly, perhaps, and more importantly, I discovered very quickly that I've never counted it up, but I suspect in the 20 years that I worked in politics, I probably wrote maybe 300 speeches about the lives children lead and about the way in which children live, and about the circumstances and the deprivation and the disadvantage and all of that. And it took me a very, very short period of time to realise, if you'll pardon the expression, that I didn't know my arse from my elbow when it came to the lives children lead and the reasons that lifelong learning is so important. One of the experiences I've had, which actually, and I'm on this journey a long time now, a journey where every day I wake up and realise I have something else to learn. Shortly before Christmas, I was invited to impersonate a man who goes around with a long white beard and a big red suit in a number of our projects. A job that I love doing, I have to tell you. I love it so much. I was asked to do it a couple of times last year, and I went out and bought my own suit. And oddly enough, a suit that doesn't need any padding or anything. And I issued a kind of CEO edict to the organisation that if Santa Claus, I can say Santa Claus here, there's nobody under 12 here, not right. If Santa Claus was coming to any of the projects, the CEO was available. So I got to do it a lot more this time. And in one of our projects, which was actually in Avila and Finglas and the Tesso project, big group of very excited, occasionally apprehensive 4-, 5-, and 6-year-olds gathered to meet Santa. And when the business was done, they decided that they wanted to sing a song to send Santa on his way. And they all started singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And I stood there listening and drinking it in and really loving the experience, and noticed that one of them, actually one of the biggest boys in the group, wasn't singing at all. And I discovered afterwards that the reason he wasn't singing was because he didn't know the words. He didn't know the words of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and he was 6. And the reason he didn't know the words of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star was because nobody had ever sung it to him. I was a little boy whose lifelong learning is already well behind the curve, and who has a lot of catching up to do. The other day, 3 days ago, I met a woman called Rita. I rang her and asked her if I could use her name, and she said I can use her first name. Rita would be a little younger than me, and she told me her story, which was of a child who was put into Golden Bridge at the age of 4, and lived a life of abuse from then until the age of 18. It wasn't until she left Golden Bridge that she realized or discovered that she had 3 sisters, all of whom were in Golden Bridge at the same time she was. She was never introduced to them, and she never knew their names because every kid in Golden Bridge had a number. She decided to bury the experience of Golden Bridge, to bury it as deep within her as she possibly could. Even though she got to know her sisters subsequently, she never discussed it with them, she never discussed it with her own children, until the program, Dear Daughters, was broadcast. And one of her sisters was interviewed for that program, but died before it was broadcast, and her story as a result wasn't included in the program. And she decided then that she better tell her kids what had happened to her. And the act of telling her kids sparked something in her about what she didn't know, and about what she'd been through, and about what she hadn't learned, and about not even so much about how she'd suffered and how she'd been brutalized, but about all the gaps, every single gap that was there, which made her unable to explain her experience to her siblings, unable to articulate it, unable to put it into words. And she decided that she'd better get some help with this, and she ended up going to counselling, and that became a very, very painful experience, but a very therapeutic experience ultimately. And then she decided that there must be an awful lot of people out there who can't articulate these kinds of things as well, and who've been through similar kinds of experience, and so on. And the only way I can begin to address that for myself and for people I value is to go and get myself some education. And she has worked really, really hard.